The studio lights burned bright, casting a sharp glow across the polished stage as the audience buzzed with anticipation. It was supposed to be another lively episode, the kind that Andy Cohen had mastered over the years. Quick wit, playful jabs, and just enough drama to keep viewers hooked. But that night carried a different energy, something unspoken yet undeniable. When Reba McEntire stepped onto the stage, the room shifted. She wasn't just a guest, she was a presence. Her calm smile, confident posture, and unmistakable aura commanded attention without her saying a word. The audience erupted in applause, but beneath it, there was curiosity. Everyone knew Reba didn't just show up, she showed up with purpose. Andy greeted her with his usual charm, a grin that suggested he was ready to steer the conversation wherever he pleased. "Reba, always a pleasure," he said, gesturing for her to sit. "You've had quite the career. But let's talk about some recent controversies, shall we?" There it was, the spark. Reba tilted her head slightly, her smile unwavering but her eyes sharpening just a touch. "Well, Andy," she replied smoothly, "I figured we'd talk about music, maybe life. But sure, let's go wherever you want." The audience chuckled nervously. Andy leaned forward, sensing an opening. "There's been talk, people saying you've been a little out of touch lately, that maybe you're not connecting with the newer generation like you used to." A ripple went through the crowd. It wasn't just a question, it was a challenge. Reba paused for a moment, letting the silence stretch just long enough to make everyone uncomfortable. She crossed her hands calmly in her lap, then leaned slightly toward Andy. "Out of touch?" she repeated softly. "That's interesting." Andy nodded, pushing further. "Well, you know how it is. Fans evolve, trends change." Before he could finish, Reba raised a finger, not rudely but with authority. The room went still. "Andy," she said, her voice gentle but firm, "I've been in this industry for over 4 decades. I've seen trends come and go. I've seen artists rise and fall. And through it all, I've stayed true to who I am." The audience began to clap softly at first. She continued, her gaze locked on him. "So if being out of touch means I don't chase every trend or change myself to fit someone else's idea of relevance, then I'll wear that proudly." The applause grew louder. Andy shifted in his seat, clearly not expecting that response. But he wasn't ready to back down. "Fair enough," he said quickly. "But don't you think staying relevant sometimes means adapting?" Reba smiled again, but this time it wasn't just polite, it was knowing. "Adapting and losing yourself are 2 very different things," she replied. "And I think people can tell the difference." The audience erupted. Some stood, clapping enthusiastically. Andy laughed awkwardly, trying to regain control. Okay, you've got a point there." But the tension hadn't disappeared. If anything, it had sharpened. He flipped through his cue cards, then looked up with a slightly mischievous grin. "Let's switch gears. There are also rumors about backstage disagreements with other artists. Care to clear that up?" A few gasps echoed through the crowd. Reba leaned back this time, crossing one leg over the other, completely at ease. "You know, Andy," she said slowly, "I've learned something over the years." He raised an eyebrow. "Oh?" "People love a good story, sometimes more than they love the truth." The audience murmured in agreement. She leaned forward again, her voice steady and clear. "I treat people with respect. Always have. And if someone has a problem with me, I'd rather they come talk to me directly instead of whispering behind cameras." The crowd applauded again, louder than before. Andy opened his mouth, but for a moment no words came out. The dynamic had shifted completely. This wasn't his show anymore, it was hers. Trying one last time, he chuckled and said, "You're turning this interview around on me, aren't you?" Reba laughed lightly, the tension breaking just a bit. "No, honey," she said warmly. "I'm just answering your questions." The audience burst into laughter and applause. But then she added, her tone softening just enough to bring everything full circle. "I've been through a lot in my life and career. And if there's one thing I've learned, it's that you don't have to tear someone down to have a good conversation." That line hit differently. Even Andy paused, nodding slowly. "That's actually a really good point," he admitted. For the first time that night, there was no edge in his voice, just sincerity. The energy in the room shifted again, this time into something warmer, more genuine. The tension melted away, replaced by mutual respect. Andy smiled, setting his cards aside. "All right," he said, raising his hands slightly. Let's talk about your music. Because at the end of the day, that's what it's all about, right? Reba grinned. Now that's a conversation I'm ready for. The audience cheered louder than ever. As the interview moved forward, the atmosphere felt completely different. The earlier friction had transformed into something almost electric, not conflict, but connection. Reba shared stories, laughed with the audience, and reminded everyone exactly why she had remained a beloved figure for so long. And Andy? He leaned in, listened more, and let her shine. By the time the segment ended, there was no question about what had just happened. It wasn't humiliation in the loud, explosive sense people might expect. It was something quieter, more powerful. Reba hadn't raised her voice. She hadn't lashed out. She had simply stood her ground, with grace, confidence, and truth. And in doing so, she didn't just win the moment. She owned it.